The internet loves authenticity until it actually gets it. That's the weird game creators end up trapped in. Audiences say they want real people, honesty, flaws, transparency, but the second somebody they've placed on a pedestal slips even slightly outside the image they created in their heads, everything changes. Suddenly, every tweet gets dissected, every old clip gets reposted, and every mistake becomes proof that the person was secretly fake all along. And right now, almost nobody represents that better than bbno. Because over the past few months, the audience that helped build him into one of the internet's favorite rappers has slowly started turning against him. And the craziest part is that most of it didn't even happen because of one massive scandal. It happened because the version of him people bought into started cracking apart in real time. Everybody wears masks. That's normal. There's the version of yourself you show your coworkers, the version your friends see, the version your family sees, and then there's who you actually are when nobody's around. Most people naturally switch personalities depending on the environment they're in. Maybe you tone yourself down around certain people. Maybe you joke differently depending on the friend group. Maybe you avoid saying certain things in public that you'd say privately without even thinking twice. That's just being human. But there's a difference between adapting socially and completely building a public identity around values you can't consistently live up to. That's where things get dangerous, especially online, because once your audience starts seeing you as morally perfect, they stop treating you like a person and start treating you like a symbol. And symbols aren't allowed to mess up. That's basically the position Alex, better known online as bbno, slowly built himself into. By 2024 and early 2025, he wasn't just another rapper making goofy internet music anymore. He had become this weird combination of internet native celebrity, meme personality, progressive artist advocate, and anti-AI spokesperson, all wrapped into one brand. And financially, it was working unbelievably well.
Now it seemed like a lot of the black guys are like a little softer, like a little bit, like I saw a black guy with glasses the other day.
My favorite streamer without indubious question is Asmongold, baby!
Millions of monthly listeners on Spotify, billions of streams across his catalog, sold-out tours, huge collaborations, viral TikToks, festival appearances, and one of the most loyal fan bases you could realistically ask for as an internet artist. Even people who didn't actively listen to him still knew who he was because he existed everywhere online all at once. But what really separated him from a lot of artists wasn't necessarily the music, it was the image. Alex spent years building the perception that he wasn't some out-of-touch industry product. He came across like someone who genuinely understood internet culture because he grew inside it. He interacted with streamers, leaned into memes, joked constantly online, and presented himself like somebody who was still part of the same internet ecosystem as his audience instead of above it. That's a very powerful thing because audiences forgive almost anything from creators they think are one of us. A huge part of that image also revolved around morality and ethics, especially regarding artists and AI. He became extremely vocal about AI-generated content and repeatedly positioned himself as somebody who believed real artists deserved protection and support. He openly criticized the rise of AI media and framed it as something dangerous for creativity and humanity itself. At one point, he even made a public statement saying he was increasingly worried about how advanced AI-generated media was becoming, warning people about misinformation and commercial exploitation while telling audiences to stand against it. That message resonated heavily online because a lot of artists already felt anxious about AI replacing creative work. So when somebody with a massive platform publicly sided with artists, people naturally respected it. At the same time, Alex leaned heavily into progressive internet culture in general. LGBTQ topics, anti-ICE rhetoric, social issues, streamer culture, political signaling, all of it became tied in to the way people viewed him. And honestly, for a while, it worked perfectly. He managed to position himself as somebody who was funny and unserious while still appearing ethically aware and socially conscious. That's basically the dream formula for surviving online in the modern internet era. But then came the problem that always eventually appears when somebody builds too much of their identity around public approval. The audience starts demanding consistency at impossible levels. One of the first examples people really started pointing at involved Asmongold.
One of which being people think he only follows the current thing at the time or has the safest takes imaginable. An example of this being his opinion on AI, as if you didn't know he is heavily against AI art, and he thinks you should always support and commission real artists.
Back in 2024, before Asmongold became significantly more political online, Alex was openly a fan. Not casually either. He talked about him publicly, referenced him at shows, and even got a tattoo connected to him. It wasn't subtle. The association was very real and very public. But once Asmongold started becoming more controversial online and internet discourse around him shifted, Alex suddenly started scrubbing those connections away. The internet noticed almost immediately, because people always notice when creators quietly rewrite history, and the thing that really amplified it was his music video for Mary Poppins. Right at the beginning of the video, there's a disclaimer explaining that he had censored certain people because he no longer supported their ethical beliefs. Then, viewers immediately noticed a figure representing Asmongold sitting on a throne with his face covered by a lizard graphic. The funny thing is that the censorship almost backfired because it drew more attention to him than if Alex had simply ignored it entirely. People watching the video couldn't stop talking about it because it felt weirdly performative. Instead of coming across like a natural moral stance, it felt more like somebody desperately trying to publicly distance themselves from a person who had become inconvenient for their audience. And what made the criticism worse was the inconsistency people pointed out afterward. Others featured in the same video had their own histories involving slurs, controversies, or allegations, but they weren't censored or called out in the same way. So immediately, people began forming a narrative. Alex only seemed willing to publicly condemn people when doing so benefited his image. That's the important part here. Whether that interpretation was fair or not almost didn't matter.
I'm fat, I'm skinny, I'm ugly, I'm pretty, I'm weird, I'm witty.
Once audiences start believing your morality is performative instead of genuine, everything you do afterward gets filtered through that lens. And unfortunately for Alex, that perception only got stronger once artists themselves started speaking up. The situation that really ignited everything began with a smaller animator named Rice. According to them, Alex's team reached out wanting an animation meme commission. For a newer artist, that kind of opportunity feels massive. Getting contacted by somebody with millions of followers sounds career-changing when you're just starting, so naturally they accepted. But the first major mistake happened immediately. Payment apparently wasn't discussed up front. Anybody familiar with freelance creative work already knows that's dangerous territory. Rates should always be established before work begins, because otherwise expectations become completely mismatched. But since this was one of their first big commissions, they continued anyway and completed the animation before compensation was finalized. Once the project was done, the offer reportedly came in around $100. For animation work, especially custom work tied to a major artist brand, that number immediately raised eyebrows. After speaking with friends and realizing how underpriced the commission was, the artist pushed back slightly and the amount increased somewhat, reportedly landing around $150. The artist claimed this wasn't hidden information at all. Their account openly displayed the kind of content they created. So from their perspective, it looked like Alex's team was perfectly comfortable commissioning them privately, but unwilling to publicly acknowledge them because it conflicted with his image. That distinction matters because Alex's public branding revolved so heavily around supporting artists. Suddenly, critics had what looked like a direct contradiction between his messaging and his behavior. The situation exploded after the artist publicly warned other NSFW creators against collaborating with him. And what really intensified everything was the accusation of hypocrisy. According to the artist, Alex had no issue working with or paying adult models significantly larger amounts for content elsewhere, making the refusal to repost their animation feel inconsistent and selective. At that point, the internet latched onto the story hard. People started reposting screenshots, sharing emails, dissecting conversations, and searching for additional examples. Other artists then began sharing their own experiences involving low offers, unclear expectations, inconsistent communication, or promises of exposure that never fully materialized. Some creators claimed they felt valued only when their posts performed well publicly. But the situation wasn't completely one-sided either, which is important. Several artists also defended Alex, saying they had perfectly positive experiences with him and his team. Some reported being paid fairly with clear communication and no issues whatsoever. When somebody constantly brands themselves as an ethical creator, a champion of artists, and somebody morally superior to exploitative industry systems, audiences naturally expect them to operate at a higher standard than everyone else. So even relatively normal business mistakes begin feeling like betrayals. That's why this controversy spread far beyond the original artist's complaints. Once the perception cracked, people started re-examining everything connected to him. Other creators began accusing him of failing to properly credit inspiration for content. One of the biggest examples involved a creator named Dearest Sinner, who posted a video arguing that Alex had heavily copied one of her concepts without properly acknowledging her. When people compared the videos side by side, the similarities were difficult to ignore. The structure, setup, and execution looked extremely close. By that point though, it almost didn't matter whether accusations were accurate. The internet had already entered full pile-on mode, and that's the stage where online controversies become less about facts and more about momentum. What's fascinating is that despite all of this, Alex's career itself barely suffered in any measurable way. Tours still sold, streams remained massive, his visibility arguably increased. In fact, the drama itself boosted attention toward him significantly during certain periods. That's one of the strangest realities about internet backlash. Sometimes controversy damages reputations emotionally far more than it damages careers financially. That's why controversial creators sometimes survive scandals more easily than squeaky clean ones. Audiences already expect messiness from them, but creators who build themselves into symbols of virtue create a much more fragile relationship with their fan base. One inconsistency becomes evidence that the entire identity was fake. That's the trap Alex seems stuck in now. He became deeply dependent on audience approval while simultaneously building a fan base obsessed with ideological consistency. And those audiences are almost impossible to satisfy forever because standards constantly escalate. Every public figure eventually disappoints people once enough attention gets focused onto them. Ironically, a little controversy actually helps humanize creators. It reminds audiences that they're dealing with actual people instead of polished avatars engineered for approval. But when somebody spends years smoothing out every edge and carefully curating a morally untouchable image, even small mistakes begin feeling catastrophic. And that's why bbno's audience feels like it's betraying him now. Not because he committed some unforgivable crime, not because one mistake destroyed his career, but because the illusion broke. The internet stopped seeing him as a flawless symbol and started seeing him as another creator navigating branding, public pressure, business decisions, and contradictions like everybody else. The audience that once protected him now scrutinizes him because they no longer feel emotionally attached to the perfect version of him they originally bought into. And once that shift happens online, it's incredibly hard to reverse. Still, realistically, Alex will probably continue being extremely successful. The music career isn't collapsing. The streams aren't disappearing. The tours aren't suddenly empty. Financially and professionally, he'll likely be completely fine moving forward. But psychologically, there's a massive difference between being popular and being trusted. And right now, trust is the thing slowly slipping away.